Yeah, the
sort of
layers of like
thing.
what we're going through, the trauma as a society and the world, and then the whole screen layer of all the screens that were happening for everyone and how that's fatiguing in and of itself. And like, how do we do this as a profession ethically, and like what is okay to use and not okay? It's yes.
Yeah, like how do you do it ethically, right? Like I think there's a lot of fear sort of instilled through grad school and in the profession. Like, yes, be an ethical human being and follow the laws. I think there's some element of that creating pressure on people who are actually quite good and well-behaved human beings that we should be it feels restrictive to me, and it
Yeah.
feels like potentially not helpful and healing. And so I do think there's an aspect of that is worth looking at. Like, why are we kind of like putting fear in our grad students as they go out into the profession? Like, why does it have to feel like that?
Welcome to the Therapist Burnout Podcast, episode 39. Hey, therapist, welcome back. I am joined by a guest today, Emily Irwin. I'm so excited to have you. How are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm awesome. Well, I'm excited for you to tell your story. So, how I kick it off is just ask you, what is your burnout story?
Yeah, so I've got a two-layer burnout story. In 2012, I graduated with school psych and school counseling degrees, and then went to work in the public schools just north of Seattle and worked in a dual role as a school psych and school counselor. So that gives you some information. It was a lot of
Oh,
job duties. Yes.
I know what that looks like. Okay. I'm going to store it in my hat. Go ahead.
Yes, yes, and I was the last dual to go through the Seattle U counseling program. So those two professions are really working on the credentialing is becoming more separate, and so it wasn't such a feasible thing. But this school district, the Edmond School District in Washington, was employing dual school psychs and school counselors. And both of those things I feel like I encompass, and so I didn't wanna pick one or the other. I wanted to do all of it, which is also a thing. And so in that role, I worked for 2 years as a unpaid intern in that district, one for each of the degrees. And then I also worked for 5 years in that full-time role there. And I did all the things there. I ran all the teams. I developed really good skills. I loved working with some of my coworkers. And then in one summer, the counseling or the psychology department had us read books about mindfulness and meditation. And I realized when I started practicing those things that my system was not okay with the level of stress and all of the tension and all of the things going on in my body. I love working with kids in schools and supporting young people. That was always what I wanted to do. I've said I'm on this earth to support and help young people, but that job did not make me feel good in my brain and body. And so I started making moves to leave the school district. And it was really hard when you get a degree, a school psychology degree or a school counseling degree. As an assigned female at birth person, I do think that we tend to do the jobs that we get degrees for, and we don't kind of risk it,
Yeah.
right? It's just this more A to Z plan. And so I had a lot of grief and loss around, I got these degrees, how can I not use them? And like, what does that mean about me if I leave? And so I eventually did leave the school district. I just left entirely. And I opened a private practice as a mental health therapist in 2017. And in Washington, you can do that when you're an associate licensed counselor. And so I had my associate license, opened my practice, and saw kids and teens and adults. And then it was going good. And there were a lot of things that worked better. I was trying
Hmm.
to design my environment so that it worked for me. And then COVID hit.
I was like, then the damn
Yeah,
pandemic.
I know everybody's gonna talk about the COVID
Enter
hit. Yes.
pandemic.
Yes, so We moved, right. So I got rid of my office and we moved all to virtual. We all made that switch and it was a lot of work. And I'm not sure we've talked about that very much as a group, like what that took from us. Not only to
Yeah.
be experiencing the pandemic, but many of us moving it entirely to a medium that we did not expect to be on or doing. I was like rushing trying to take courses to figure out how to make this happen. And I'm experiencing this and experiencing it through my clients. It's just an unheard
Yeah, the
of
layers of like
thing.
what we're going through, the trauma as a society and the world, and then the whole screen layer of all the screens that were happening for everyone and how that's fatiguing in and of itself. And like, how do we do this as a profession ethically, and like what is okay to use and not okay? It's yes.
Yeah, like, how do you do it ethically right? Like, I think there's a lot of fear sort of instilled through grad school and in the profession. Like, yes, be an ethical human being and follow the laws. I think there's some element of that creating pressure on people who are actually quite good and well-behaved human beings that we should be it feels restrictive to me, and it
Yeah.
feels like potentially not helpful and healing. And so I do think there's an aspect of that that is worth looking at. Like, why are we kind of like putting fear in our undergrads or not undergrads, grad students as they go out into the profession? Like, why does it have to feel like that
Yeah, and I love
versus
how even some ethics trainings are labeled CYA.
right? That's a big it appeals to people. And why
Yeah.
does it appeal? Because there's fear instilled. And I've talked to some folks and what like who are BIPOC supervisors who supervise new clinicians, and they're talking about how BIPOC folks are coming through grad school with a lot of trauma. And I experienced trauma in grad school too as a gender diverse and queer person. And definitely didn't come out feeling very resourced to start. I
Yeah.
think that's a big part of burnout for everybody is grad school
Mhm.
and becoming a therapist itself. I mean, so I was licensed as the associate therapist and like was doing supervision, was doing paying for supervision, doing supervision and starting a practice, which is it worked for me because I'd already been a professional. Some people are coming out of grad school, right, just fresh, like have never had work experience, right, and opening a practice. So that's much harder. But when COVID hit, I started experiencing in my sort of personal life much more impact. And as an HSP, highly sensitive person, I did sort of think I was on the front end of what the impact would be of COVID. I started having insomnia and stopped being able to fall asleep. And
Yeah.
it was that experience that really catapulted me into burnout in private practice in iteration number one of my private practice. And something that I have not been able to talk about yet, but I want to be able to talk about is that I ended up closing my practice quite suddenly because I couldn't figure out anything about the sleep. And I mean, I was trying to figure it out. And
Yeah.
so I actually went to a residential treatment program in Tucson for about a month, like a year into the pandemic. And
Good for you.
it was really weird to be a therapist at a residential treatment program. I mean, the shame and the all the stories I was telling myself, but we didn't know what to do. Like nobody knew how to help and resources were really limited because a lot of people were struggling. And it didn't work. It didn't help. So I have lots of feelings about that, but I did try. And it is a part of my story I do want to share more about um,
But maybe
to
not for
break the
today, I'm hearing?
yeah, yeah,
Okay. Sure,
yeah.
we won't push that.
Oh
But
no, oh out for today? No, it's totally. I am open to talking about it.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I can't imagine the layers of, I certainly have been open about talking about my own mental health difficulties during that time. I developed panic attacks,
yeah,
driving,
yeah.
so I couldn't drive on the highway for some time, which I don't know why this happens, but do you always get a client that, like, has your exact same issue that you're having? This is what the world sends you, I just feel
Oh,
like.
yeah, I get all the HSPs. Yeah, yeah.
But, like, I had really not seen that many, so I specialized in brain injury and trauma at the time, and I get this person who's coming in with, like, all this trauma around car accidents and concussion, just at the same time, like, several of them at the same time I'm going through this. So I just always find that interesting how, the work that we're going through finds us. But yeah, I mean, I think the layers of the pandemic dealing with your own mental health and how that does feel shameful. Like, how am I doing this work if I'm struggling so much? Someone I just talked to was like, I was crying for about an hour in the morning and I dried my tears and went online and on
Yeah.
session. I think a lot of us were doing that. I think a lot of us were holding all of our clients and holding our own mental health. And many of us struggle with that
Yeah. It almost
because,
makes me teary just the way you put it. Yeah. Like, it is we're so human, and we're not so different from our clients in that way, and I want more of that. I think that would create less burnout
yeah, if we're more
if we
open.
more open and more human, and also without the expectation that I'm going to fix somebody, which I still think is out there, that therapists fix clients. That doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
And so the pressure to fix people in the middle of a pandemic that none of us chose, and of course, we're human, and so, yeah, our own mental health, like, not sleeping for me, I mean, not sleeping for anybody creates extreme problems, and I didn't think that I could show up in a human way even. Well, actually, I didn't think I could show up in a professional way. I think if I had allowed myself to show up in a human way, I'm not sure I would have had to end my practice and go to residential treatment. But because of the way that
Mhm.
I had restricted myself and expected myself to show up as a counselor, it made me not feel like I was right enough or
Mhm.
good enough to do what I did. And I think that some people in other professions who get to go to work and not be direct with a client, I think I probably could have done that work, right? With the tiredness and the fatigue and continued. But as therapists, all of our work, we only get paid if we see clients, right? Like, it's that kind of time. There's no other way. You can't just do paperwork to get paid. You have to see the client first,
Right.
right? And so there's some privilege in not having your income be based just on that direct time. If I don't show up with a client, I don't get paid, right? And then they don't
Mhm.
get help too. But I think that sort of hit me recently of that's a big part of the pressure in
Yeah.
private practice, especially.
In private practice especially, I think, yeah, well, I think more and more other places, it's also becoming more like there's pressure on the clinician. I'm thinking of my agency self, and
Yeah,
like I was required to see 30 clients an hour. It was 26. This is what they got me, right? They said only 26 clients a week. Okay, that's high, but that was like I can do that. But if you want to take vacation, it's 30 a week.
right.
Ah.
I know. I haven't worked in an agency. I feel like working in schools is sort of like the version of working in an
Yeah, maybe I
agency
wanna
in
go
some
back
ways.
there because, I told you I work contract in working in school psychology, and I think part of the reason for me not wanting to do a full-time position is fears
Yeah.
of burnout in a school. They are very much ripe for burnout, school systems, and
Oh,
I know it depends
everybody.
on where you are, like the particular school you're in, the administration you're in. Shake your head. What is your head shake
I
saying?
I think it's yes, for sure. Like, your leadership, your principal makes a big difference, right?
Yes.
Your colleagues, your coworkers, the cultural, the energy and the culture of the school, right? It can be like resilience factors to burnout, and at the same time, it's still a system. It's still a school system. And I think that, like, that's what we see in the corporate world with burnout too, right? It's not the individual, right, who has a problem, it's the system that is not super well.
Right.
And I think so no yes, for sure, those are resilience factors, and I think the system is just the system, and it's gonna burn people out who are gonna get burned out. Even with those other factors, it might just take a little bit longer.
Right. I agree. I just, I think some of the unique pressures I see in a school system is, the administration pressure, the for teachers. Every time I go into a classroom, because the work that we do, we go and we observe the
Yeah.
student in the classroom. And so every time I'm in a classroom, I make it a point to tell a teacher, that was such a great lesson. I really enjoyed seeing you teaching. Like you're doing such a great job with our students. Uh, there there hasn't been a teacher that I've observed that weren't trying their best. I mean, I
Right.
could see it. And so I make it a point to tell them that. That being said, there are just so many pressures, I think, on the system. And in this voice coming from parents, I just did not anticipate like sitting in IEP meetings and literally being attacked and like my work being drug on the floor, picked apart by lawyers. I have just not experienced it at all in any other part of my career. And I had to really build up my resiliency around like, why are why are we treating each other this way?
Yeah. Yeah. It I was something that's been coming up in sort of the professional communities, this idea of why aren't we lifting each other up as humans? And that's not specific to any profession, but your example is perfect for it. It's like, why are we choosing to tear down instead of lift up? I think that's sort of a systemic cultural thing that's going on.
Mhm. Or
It's
this
so
adversarial role
yeah,
towards the school too. I mean, I know schools
right.
have issues, but also like sometimes getting it from parent. It's not always parents. I would say 95% of parents are so gracious and like see the work you're doing and are very wonderful. But I think there's a subset that feel like schools are out to get their children.
Yeah, and maybe they had school trauma to
Maybe
begin
yeah,
with.
that's a good point.
I've seen that a lot with parents, right? Or they just don't trust schools and the folks who work there, but they don't have the privilege to send their kids somewhere else, right? And so they feel stuck. So they're kind of
Yeah.
repeating their own trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think the teachers are under immense stress, and I mean, the thing with all of education is that nobody's getting paid the amount that they're worth, and that can't feel good over time. So obviously pay, right?
Yeah, pay.
Direct correlation to burnout for whoever. And if you have a whole system of people who are mostly underpaid significantly, that is not going to lead to a healthy system, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely been running a lot of those meetings, and you really want the work that you do to be meaningful. And I think one of the things that was hardest for me that led to burnout was that I would do all this work in testing and assessment and observing the kid in classrooms. I loved observing the kid in PE. We had a great PE teacher, and that information went nowhere.
Mhm.
And it was stated in the IEP, but it wasn't necessarily being used to really inform the instruction of the kiddo. That doesn't lead to me feeling very good about myself or the work that I do. It makes me feel small, and it makes me not feel like I matter and my expertise doesn't matter. I mean, in the way that you're talking about too, like if you're getting picked apart, your expertise is like, it doesn't matter. Like, what was that for? Right.
Mhm.
And so being treated as a whole person is important in regard to burnout.
Yeah, I think that that's a through line, us and we talked a little bit about this on the pre-interview of kind of being able to show up in our humanity
Mm,
in wherever we are. So if it's in the school system, or if it's as our role as the therapist in private practice, in a lot of ways, I think we don't feel like we can show up as our full human selves, either in a system or in the armor as a therapist where we feel like we have to show up in a certain way. And I think
yep.
for you, like when you were going through your own mental health crisis, not being able to show up to clients and say, like, actually, I'm not sleeping. Um, I'm needing to take a break because I'm having a lot of mental health symptoms, because there's that shame that we feel when we experience like, mental health problems and people seeing us as, are you competent to treat me? Or, are you the right person for me because you're quote unquote falling apart?
Right. Right. Is there space for that? Or could I have said to them, I'm experiencing sleep trouble and I may show up a little bit differently in session and I'm still here. And if,
Yeah.
right, could that be a possibility? And would that have been made my system less reactive? But yes, I really didn't expect to feel that restriction on being who I really am in the schools and then also in private practice. My hope was that private practice would really relieve that. And in many ways it did, it changed it. I could show up as a queer and gender diverse person and people could choose to work with me or not. That helped
Yeah.
me feel safer because in the schools, you're it. And if the families don't like or the kids don't like your queerness or your gender diversity, that gets tricky and that doesn't feel very good. And so I like private practice in that I put myself out there, like on my website or and on social media, and I say, "This is who I am. You can choose to work with me or not." And still, even when people choose to work with me, there's still that. Like, I'm still struggling to be my full self
Mhm.
in session, even with that change, and feeling restricted by being a licensed therapist, by the role of a therapist and what I've been taught a therapist is.
Yeah. I was gonna just ask because, like, why do you think we do that as a profession, even though we might have different identities, but we may not feel like we can show up as the person, the human we are in the room?
Yeah, so I wonder if I would love to hear from therapists who feel like they do and they can, because what are the common threads for them? So,
Mhm.
I would love to know if there are therapists who feel like that, and I think, one, they might be people who aren't scared by the fear tactics of grad school, putting, like, fear into you about ethics and the law. And then, like you said, the professional development courses that are, like, yeah, like CYA courses, right? Uh, it's very much fear-inducing, and so you don't do things because you're afraid you're gonna get in trouble, or you are afraid another clinician is gonna call you out or judge you. I've heard
Yeah.
of a lot of folks being judged on social media, like Facebook groups for therapists because the way they do or don't do their practices. And
Yeah.
again, that's back to that lifting up. Why are we aren't lifting each other up and tearing each other down, but why is there so much fear? I feel like that's a through line. There's fear everywhere. And maybe that's just amplified by the pandemic, that we're just operating at these more activated levels. But for me, I think what I was saying to you before too is I'm coming into realizing that I'm on the autism spectrum, and I didn't know this whole time through all those burnout stories that I'm not only dealing with the job and career burnout, I'm also dealing with autistic burnout. And that is something that is brand new to me literally in the last 2 days, and it makes so much sense.
Super
And so
fresh. But I love your
yeah,
openness.
yeah, I think it could help a lot of people, especially if other clinicians are wondering if they're neurodiverse. I have worked with so many people who are on the autism spectrum, and I love working with them, and, like, those kids were always some of my
They're the
favorites,
best.
and I my brain works so similarly. I can follow the conversation, and I never felt it in myself. I never had, like, the felt sense of, like, "Oh, I feel that." And I meditate daily. I meditated every day last calendar year for 30 minutes. Like, I am really clued into my internal knowing and my internal compass, inner knowing, inner compass.
Mhm.
I do not feel autism. It's only been in relationship to other people who also have autism, generally assigned female at birth folks who are reflecting it back to me and saying, "You feel familiar. I you make sense to me, and your brain works the way that my brain works. Have you considered?" And when I consider autistic burnout, I listened to a few podcasts yesterday because I wanted to speak about it in a good way with you. I wanted to make sure I was
Yeah.
complete and accurate, which is also a very spectrum-y thing. Um, and that just amplifies everything that I told you, right, about those burnout stories. And it means that I am masking, doing a lot of masking and not being myself. And
So,
I don't know
can
what
you
that
share
yeah.
what masking for people that may not be aware of, may not work with neurodiverse folks or may not be aware of that term? Can you just share a little bit about masking from your perspective?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure each person means it generally means the same thing, but I would obviously recommend people ask that person what it means to them.
Yes.
For me, it means, like, I'm hiding myself to make myself socially palatable, or I'm hiding who I really am and my instincts and my intuition because I know that socially that might have a repercussion, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to operate socially as myself. And if I do, there's gonna be a negative outcome, or I've received negative outcomes and negative consequences for how I've behaved or shown up in the past, and I don't want that to happen again because that did not feel good or I was confused.
Mhm.
And so it's like this hiding, and I also realized that trauma is so much about hiding. I mean, it is traumatic to hide yourself, and I don't wanna hide anymore. It's too stressful. And
Yeah.
so, masking is quite, like, elaborate, and it's not it's not just something like it's very like an in-depth thing to be able to do. You have to be really kind of smart to mask to know what to hide. It is like a difficulty with social situations and relationships, and it also shows a high knowing of them. like a high
Yeah.
observation. You're very hyper vigilant to what's happening around you, and you want
Yeah,
to
and I think
be,
it's
yeah,
likely we see it
accepted.
more, with female identifying folks on the spectrum. And we already know that there's potentially underdiagnosis of female identifying folks, which most of this people that listen to this podcast are female identifying due
Yeah,
to being in the helping profession. So I just think it's important for us to know if it's yourself who might be on the spectrum and could be someone who does mask, because you may not realize that you're not showing up as your true self and feel like you need to show up in a different way to feel like, whatever you're saying is landing socially appropriately with that person, or you're saying it in a way that's they're going to accept or receive better,
right.
and may not realize that the toll on you, like, what does that cost to you to do that? And
It's
at
a
the end of the
huge
day,
cost.
right. So we'll say more about that
Yeah, I
from your
mean,
perspective, your personal
it's
perspective.
energy. It's all energy. So if I'm not sleeping and have insomnia, and that pathway to burnout is gonna get bigger. And I know that a lot of people, especially neurodiverse folks, have trouble with sleep and insomnia, and it makes sense. And the podcast I listened to yesterday, we're talking about how autistic burnout is higher when we're masking. The masking is higher, like they're correlated. The more
Yeah.
masking we do, the more burnout we have. And so then as a queer and gender diverse person, I'm masking too for those,
All the
right?
layers, like
Right. And
how
so
you
it's just
interact socially, and then like like you as a person, like, and who you show up in the world as a human and your body, right?
right, right. So there's so many layers that I think really still unpacking there. But right now I'm looking back and going, it makes so much more sense. I'm not a weak human. This is part of how my brain works. And I wanted so badly to work in schools with kids. I loved being in school as a kid, and I wanted to support and serve kids there. And
Yeah.
it's a loss to not be able to be in that environment, to realize,
Mhm.
"Oh, I can't do that and be healthy." And I wish I could. I wish I was stronger, but that narrative itself is not
Yeah, I was like,
accurate.
"Ooh,
I
let's dig into that one."
Right? Right, that if I could push through it, right? That's such cultural messaging. If
Yeah.
I just push through it, I could do this. I want it. I'm motivated, right? And then so what's the cost?
What's the cost? I think that's always
Yeah.
the question we have to ask ourselves, right? There's a part of me that still wants to be a therapist, that still wants to do
Yeah.
EMDR with folks, that feels weak, that feels loss from not being able
Yeah.
to do that work, because I know the beautiful side of it.
Right, those moments,
Yeah.
I'm so curious what your those beautiful moments are to you, because as you said it, I knew exactly where it is in my body and how
Uh-huh.
lit up we can get,
Yeah,
right?
there's
When
so
you
many beautiful, like, oh, my mind goes to a client I lost
Yeah.
in the pandemic very suddenly, and they had cancer, and I didn't get to say goodbye, and I had such a connection with that person. And so the beauty and a therapeutic connection, that wasn't specifically EMDR work, but with that individual, I just remember like small moments, like there was lavender outside my office, and they would just pick a piece. "Hey, I thought you might want to smell this throughout your day so you can, just feel more grounded, and, want to give you something." And they knew I couldn't accept like money, gifts. So they would do things like that. Like, "I'm just going to bring you this piece of lavender that I picked," or write me a nice card. It was just, that was that type of client that just thought of me and saw me so much in my humanity and who I was. And
Mhm.
I knew just wanted the best for me. And so I think I thought of that person and that connection. And that was part of why I left. I think
Yeah.
because that the deepness of the connection as a therapist that I can have with my client is so beautiful. And it's also something I could no longer hold due to like the other parts of my life that I need to hold, like being a mother.
Yeah.
Um, and like the energy that goes into that, and also being a trauma therapist and the other sides of it, that like when sessions would not go right, or there wasn't that connection that I had with the client, and then I felt like I was doing things inappropriately. But I
Right.
think going back to that beautiful connection piece, and then seeing someone get through horrific trauma, and like they're living a functional life, and I see them at the end, like from beginning to end, get through something they never thought they could get through.
Mm.
And just what a gift that was to me for me to see that in that person. I mean, those are some of the two moments that come to mind. But there's so many.
It makes me wanna put that question out there to the LinkedIn world or somewhere and just get this mass of those beautiful moments and
Yeah.
celebrate those. I
When
haven't
this
even
comes out,
seen.
we're gonna do
Right.
a
Let's
thread.
do that, let's do
We're gonna
it.
do it together. We'll do a thread. Like, what are your
Yeah,
most beautiful moments from
beautiful
therapy?
moments.
I'm
I
writing it
just
down.
yeah, I've worked with teens most recently, and they are the most precious human beings, and it's really those real moments. I think real is the word, like, that you had real connections, and it's real kind of a human love for each other and seeing
Yeah.
of each other, and it goes both ways, but it doesn't make us a worse therapist for being also seen by our client, and there's something that I feel bad about in saying that. It's not their
Mhm.
job to see me. I know, and it happens. We all of, like, the interpersonal neurobiology research would support that that happens, like
Of
Dan
course
Siegel,
it
you know, like,
does.
all of his work, right?
And I think what you're speaking about also is that we're not supposed to get attached. We're not, we're there for them. They're not there for us. But the
Well,
nature of human relationship is that
are we defying what is natural in the work of being a therapist? Truly. I mean, I'm reading Decolonizing Therapy right now, and I it's so rich that I cannot get through it. I'm
okay,
stalled
what's it?
out. Yeah, and it makes me wonder about why do we heal in one-on-one settings versus why don't we heal in community settings? Because so much of healing through time has been community-based,
Yeah.
indigenous cultures, that's the way that you heal and support each other is in community, and we have really
Mm.
changed it. I mean, really in this if you look at the timeline of one-on-one therapy, it isn't for very much in the history of human
Yeah, probably
beings,
since like
right?
what the incidents of like medical model, I would
Right,
think,
right.
in Freud and all of that.
Right, and, Dr. Milan, who wrote that book, she calls it the mental health industrial complex,
Yeah.
right? I think which is important to notice that we are part of a
Industrialism, like
complex. Mhm.
that comes about in a lot of different sectors and especially the healing sector. And then what we continue to see today is, mental health is treated like a commodity, especially what we're seeing in tech,
Yeah.
that people are investing billions of dollars and it's off of our labor that they are making this money. And we're
Mm.
not, because we're not seeing it.
No, and again, right, like, if everybody in a system was getting paid the things that they need, clients and therapists, would private practice also feel better? Right? There's people doing research and studies around, like, the basic income. I'm not exactly sure what the term is, but where you give everybody in a town or an area this certain amount per month or per year, right? Like, so everybody's making a certain amount of money, and that, of course, research is showing it helps. Everybody has what they need. So, why can't like, I could only see, like, doing therapy in a place like that would make more people have access to therapy.
Yeah.
Right, and then we'd all potentially be paid better. Like, if our
Hmm.
clients were getting paid better,
Yeah.
would we all be doing better too? But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think I love what I'm hearing that's kind of disrupting a lot of the way, and I think that's the gift of the pandemic, is that we really disrupted how we thought about work and the
yeah,
work that we're doing. And it
right.
was messy and ugly in many regards, but there's also, I think, this opening of like, really, why are we doing what we're doing?
I mean, that's what I think why you and I have connected before. It is to ask, I wanna be an out of the box person. I wanna be a disruptor. I wanna ask the questions about why are we doing therapy the way that we're doing it, and why are we continuing to do that? I had my own therapist at one point talked about family systems as being sort of a shape or a container, right? And each family has their shape. And it might be an unhealthy shape, right? And so if someone passes away or someone leaves the family, sometimes the shape will change, right? And it can be healthier. But sometimes the people in the system just go ahead and form that same shape as before. So I think about what you just said about the pandemic. We were operating in this sort of shape or container in society or as therapists. And then this thing happened that blew it up and it was like, whoa, our container could look different. right? Our shape could look different. But how much have we all contributed to just making it the same again, right? Yes, we're asking the questions, but are we actually doing it differently?
Yeah,
And so it makes me think of that metaphor.
definitely. I know, I think this theme of community is what I've been thinking of the past kind of week or so with regard to the systems we're in and why, going back to this point of like everything has become individual therapy when we need to be in community. When the
Right.
reason why we're becoming more sick is because we're as isolated as we'd ever been
Yes.
and we're on our devices. So we're more
Yes.
connected, yet we're more isolated and we're more depressed. So the
Yeah.
answer is community, yet what is given is
One
individual
on one.
therapy. And what I talk to people in my individual therapy is how can you like find someone in
Go
your
get
community?
connected. Right. They found us in their community. Yeah. Yes. I mean, that's exactly what I'm thinking about. Exactly that question. Right, because right, the author, Jonathan Haidt, right, like, wrote The Anxiety Generation, and
Yeah.
then but we've had, like I wrote a thesis in 2003 in college and used the book Bowling Alone. So by 2003, we were already writing books about community-based things like bowling, which was this amazing cultural hub, right, for so many people, and then but the title is Bowling Alone, right? That's 2003.
Yeah.
Right? I feel like that was a long that makes me feel old, and that was a long time ago, right? It's
Yeah, I
like
think we started to see those, I think Jonathan's height, I don't know if
height.
I'm saying
Okay.
I don't know.
We should ask him.
We should
Yeah.
ask him. I'm not sure.
Jonathan, if you're out there,
Jonathan
how do we pronounce
Haidt. We're not sure. I'm gonna look it up before this comes out so I know because I'm talking about this book all the time, Anxious Generation.
me too.
So episode 29, if you didn't listen to episode 29, that I did a whole episode on that book. Blowing my mind, y'all. So what we're seeing is that increase in depression, anxiety, really across the age span, not so much for your middle-aged folks like 50 plus, but for really everyone, I would say 49 and under, which I
Yeah,
would be in that group.
me too.
Um, I'm pushing it.
I'm almost there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm mid 40s. So, but anyone in kind of the X millennial and down had, I think because we grew up with the technology in some way or form, like it didn't really happen for me until college, till I had a computer. Like
Right.
we didn't have a computer growing up in my house.
Yeah.
But when I got to college, that was different. But I think it's the advent of everyone being on a computer, probably even before that, because I think they say really it was since the 70s that our culture started to become more individualistic. And it was already individualistic as just being in America anyway.
A
So
super
different than,
white, yeah, society.
yeah. So I think that was even happening. And culturally, we have these differences anyway in American culture. So people listen to this throughout the world. So I'm interested in people's perspectives about what they're seeing in their countries, but it's also international. So we're
Right.
also seeing this isolation at the advent of the smartphone technology happening cross culturally as well.
Yep.
So it's not just the US, even though, there's lots of issues with our culture, like 100%.
Right, right. It's not the causation is not cultural. Like, those could be correlates, right? But he's showing causation with the devices.
Yeah. Well, I still think it's correlational research. Um,
Mhm.
so I know causation. What are they? Now my stats background, I'm like,
I know. School's like,
cor-
"Come on, come on."
yeah. Yeah. Correlation it does not imply causation, but we're seeing the relationship cross culturally, right? So we're cross
Yep.
culturally, we're seeing the relationship, smartphone, and like mental health. So we're kind of like, we are making those inferences because we can't do an experimental group that says this group of kids will not have smartphones and this group of kids will have smartphones because that just doesn't, it just
It'd be
does.
great, actually.
We
We could
would
do
be
that.
nice to randomly assign a group of kids to not smartphone condition, but I digress. Anyway, like getting back, let's kind of get back to what we were talking about. I'm going to make sure I got to all the stuff in the pre-interview. We didn't talk so much about, though we did talk about therapist masking, so that we did get to
Mhm.
that. And just talk to me about private practice. Like maybe what are the things that are coming up for you with regard to burnout in private practice that other folks might identify with?
Yeah, so I've had that first iteration of my practice where I saw kids, teens, and adults in just sort of a general capacity, a lot of anxiety, and then also had a client experiencing OCD, and then we went down that together in terms of I got more training and served him really well, and we did some cool stuff there. And then when I left my practice after the into the pandemic, I did come back and most recently have had another iteration is the word that I've sort of chosen to use, where I was working with teens and I was working hybrid, so some virtual and some in person. And one of the things in that, I love doing things outside the box, and I because I think it's more healing than the things inside the box. So meeting clients to shoot hoops, meeting clients at a park to sit in nature, meeting clients to go for a walk, meeting them in a place in town where they love and they wanna show me this really cool thing to them or some place that's important to them. And obviously, meeting people where they're at is so important in life. They feel so
Yeah.
much more seen. And I felt really good and it felt really real. But energetically, that was too hard. I want to meet people where they're at, and I cannot be the only one going and doing that. That limits my energy and how much I'm able to do, which is not sustainable for me. And
Mhm.
I mean, I think a lot of therapists bend over backwards for their clients because they really do care about them and they wanna set up their practices so that they make sense to their clients. And I started working on Saturdays in person at an office that I was subletting, and it worked really well for my clients and their families. And that was great because they were coming feeling more resourced. But then I was burning out in this iteration because I was meeting them more than deciding what was going to work for me ahead of time. Sometimes you don't know,
Yeah.
but like
Sometimes you don't
that
know
just
till you're in it.
doesn't, yeah. So that just, some of those things, like they're all well intentioned and people were having good benefits from that, but it's just not something that I can sustain right now. And I think for me, it's just learning more about my energy and how my brain works. And I think I am wondering if I want to continue as a therapist, if that is
Okay.
something that I can do. And that is scary. Like maybe this, I often feel like kind of in my experience in the world that it's like I'm not sort of made for this world is what my experience feels like. And every time I try to make adjustments or make things better, I still don't feel like it's the right fit. Even though
Mm.
I love helping people and even though I have those beautiful moments, and even though I'm a really good therapist, and even though I'm creative in all of the things, it's just this continual learning of this world is really hard and I'm not a failure, but there's a narrative in there of I have really failed in this world and how can I add to the meaning and purpose of this world if I'm not in a helping profession. Helping is a big value to me,
Yeah.
right?
So
I
so I'm hearing like that theme of failure that I think comes up so much for therapists when they get stuck in this place of it's not therapy. So then what am I? Who am I? What am I
right.
doing?
Do I work in any working world in this universe right now? I'm not sure. I don't know what I would need to do. I know that I have lots of skills. I can make a resume full of the things I've learned over both of the professions, the school psych and school counseling and private practice. I am very well equipped, but it's like, how does my brain and body and my heart actually match in this whole world? Not just these professions, but how do I be a human being who has ease and joy
Yeah.
and not just pushing and struggling and feeling restrained over and over or feeling the need to hide? Where
Mhm.
and how can I show up in the most real way in this world, which includes work? I think it's a much it's a big existential question. Yeah. So it's kind of I feel like my burnout is life burnout. I'm at this
Mhm.
point of job burnout, autistic burnout, also experience chronic pain, so chronic pain, burnout of the body. How do I exist in this world in a way that feels life-giving,
Yeah.
right? And not just continue to sacrifice myself.
Mhm.
Yeah, those are the questions I'm asking for sure.
Yeah, and it makes me think of those themes of human giver syndrome, that
Mhm,
when we give, we often give at the expense of ourselves. And so I think it's asking yourself these questions, like, how do I it's getting curious about that ease and joy. Like, where are places where it is easy,
mhm,
where it is joyful?
right. The other thing I wanted to come back to is you were talking about the anxious generation, and then we were talking about that in relation to, like, healing and community and the amount
Yeah.
of isolation that we're experiencing.
Yes.
I wonder if operating in a more therapeutic way in community would be more easeful be because that's how we're meant to heal, right? That's a question I kinda have of, like, what would that look like? So, one example is I'm obsessed with houseplants, and I have found such meaning and joy in getting my hands in the dirt and treating houseplants like a science experiment, which I wasn't
Yeah.
really allowed to feel as a kid, like, "Oh, I could mess up," or "I could try this thing and see how it goes and collect my own data." In counseling, I always say to my clients, "Life's a science experiment. Collect your own data." Like, I can tell you to use this coping tool, but if it doesn't work for you, don't do it. Like, you collect your own data. You are like N of 1, right? So go try
Yeah.
the thing and let's see. Let's get curious, like you said. And so, like,
My
doing
metaphor was like, all of these tools are a buffet, and the
yeah,
things you like on the buffet are the things you're
right,
gonna choose. So I love
right,
those little those therapy metaphors that we give
right.
clients.
Because I found that it goes through to the houseplants. If I treat it like a science experiment and just collect my own data, I'm not worried about what Google says about this plant, or I'm not worried about this thing over here, right? I'm seeing what's true in front of me, which is so mindful, right? Mindfulness, like being in the present moment with curiosity, right?
Mhm.
And that's what that brings to me. And we're in a world that wants us to be really not present. It's very, very much promoting anti presence, anti slowing down, anti stillness, anti all the things. So for me, I think a big part of how I'd want to proceed therapeutically is bringing people together to be present. And for me, the houseplants do that. So I also think there's some studies about getting your hands in dirt is very good for the producing the good chemicals in your brain. So
Yes.
what if community healing involves coming together to get our hands in dirt? And I've asked around, like, people are kinda interested. They're like, "Yeah, I would show up to that," right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Johann Hari wrote the book Lost Connections, and he
Mhm.
talks it's like the antidepressants in other countries, sort of, and an antidepressant is a community garden that a doctor had his clients all go, like, work on together, and they all got happier, right? Like, because they worked together and they were outside and they were making things grow, right? We like to see growth, like, you talked about the growth in your clients,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's so healing to see growth.
It is. And I think it helps us stay in the work to see growth.
Yes.
So I'm gonna pivot a little bit, but it's related.
Yeah,
Because I'm gonna get to our joy question,
let's do it.
but I think it's gonna bring it all together. So,
Oh,
how are you finding joy today?
right. As you know, yeah, so pickleball is the main way that I have found joy, and it's so cheesy to say, and it's very tropey because it's happening all over the US and everybody's doing it,
It's
which
a
I
huge thing.
hate. I absolutely hate. So I have some autism with, like, the PDA profile, so I don't wanna do things that other people are doing, and I collected my own data and it's fabulous. So I've been playing twice a week, and as someone with chronic pain too, experienced who played sports growing up and hasn't been able to play, I'm really challenging my body and my brain and saying, "I've gotta do this. I need this for community." And
Yeah.
it's really brought me to know my community better. And playing our intention is to play for fun. It's very protected. We are not there to be intense or we don't worry about we keep score, but we don't worry about it. So we came together with a common intention, and that has helped protect that as a joyful thing, right?
That's
It's
great.
and it's movement, it's outside. You can see Puget Sound, like, through a little peekaboo view from the court, right? You're with people, it's social, you're moving your body. There's so many healing elements, and it's fun and goofy.
I'm gonna I'm going to do an article on, or not an article. I was reading an article, a meta-analysis on a nervous system regulation, like meditation strategies. And interestingly enough, they found that doing something like, running isn't great for your nervous system when you're already keyed up. So like how to bring your
Mhm.
nervous system down, because it's like you're in the same nervous system state.
Right.
So encouraging, things like yoga or meditation are helpful to bring your nervous system down when you're super agitated. Play, and they mention racquetball sports
Yeah.
because we're engaging our brain in that play center, which is relaxing to our bodies and our brains.
Right.
And so we can't forget the impact on play and on our neurobiology and about
Yes.
how we're meant to play as human beings.
At
And
all
so
ages.
all ages, continuously
Yeah.
trying to find these experiences and pockets of play, and how I'm going to read more about this meta-analysis to get the quote, but how it was similarly regulating than deep breathing,
It's so
which is great.
regulating.
I mean, which makes
Right.
me feel better about like racket sports because I'm a tennis
Tennis,
player.
yes. Right. So it's also the reciprocalness, right, of a racket sport. It's back and forth, right? You're
Mhm.
hitting, it's sort of like EMDR, right? Like in that
Bilateral
kind of,
stem. Yeah.
yes, right. As you walk with somebody, right? Like the back and forth, or playing catch. I've often played catch with kids in the past, or tossed a ball for gratitude practices, right? I toss the ball, I say gratitude, the ball gets tossed back to me. You with babies on the ground, right? You roll things back and forth with it. Yeah, right. That kind of play is built into how we do relationship, and we've lost a lot of that. And
Yeah.
there's so many people out there trying to promote play because we need more of it. We need more nature. Like those are the things we've lost from being on screens.
Right.
Truly, is
Right.
that in-person play. And so I've talked to a client recently about, don't focus so much on the restriction of the phone, or don't focus so much on the restriction of anything. Go towards what feels good. Like, again, your own data. Go
I
towards
love
the
I love
things like,
the concept of
right.
adding versus taking away. What can we
Yeah.
add that can actually be like, people often talk about their diet. Okay, what can you add that's nutritious? What can you
Right.
add that's regulating? And then maybe if you see something that's depleting, maybe you make that choice down the road. But
Right.
we can start by adding.
And filling in that space
Yeah.
too, which then sends the, like, cycle back towards making choices more towards those things, and filling up with that, like, fun stuff first, right?
Yes.
It takes a lot of energy to restrict and push away. I think, like, it takes a lot of energy to mask. Anything where you're suppressing or pushing or compartmentalizing, that takes a lot of energy.
It does.
Like, going towards something that feels expansive or joyful, I don't think takes as much energy in in my brain and body experience.
No.
Yeah.
We're gonna wrap up, but I just had a
Okay.
funny.
Mm.
This is the only thing that I remember literally. So I'm in Maine, and there is probably like 8 inches of snow on my driveway, it's a hill. And I'm revving my car up, trying to get up this hill to go to tennis. That is the only thing that I will actually go towards in a snowstorm because I hate to drive in the snow.
Yeah.
But and I didn't make it, and I was so
Oh,
upset
no.
that I could not get out of my driveway to go play tennis in the snowstorm. But I think our brains are very motivated to want to go to these things that are joyful and playful, and once we start adding them, we notice that nervous system regulation that happens in our brain and body. So, I'm
Yeah.
loving that we're ending in this place with our conversation, but I'm wondering where people might wanna reach out and talk more with you.
Yeah, so right now, website is, still, emilyirwin.com, and it has my iteration of working with teens, but my contact info is on there, and then you can also find me on LinkedIn.
That is great. Thank you so much. I know we're gonna stay connected. I feel like
Yep.
we think in similar ways, which I love.
Yes, I
So,
appreciate getting to meet you and virtually.
yes, I look forward to keeping the connection.
Thanks so
All
much.
right. Bye, everyone. Hey, therapist. Thanks for listening to the episode today. If you love this podcast, send it to a therapist friend who may need it. Also, consider leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcast. It lets the podcast player know that this is a great podcast. We should send it to more people. Also, I'd love to hear from you. So I have included my pen pal list for other therapists. Yes, I do write back, and I'd love to hear from you. Requests for podcast topics, to know how you're doing in this in these therapy streets. So I'm here for all of it. So I would love to hear from you, and we'll talk soon.